The basement of 412 Maple Street had always felt wrong to Lisa Thompson, even when they were children playing hide-and-seek in its shadowy corners. Now, 20 years after her twin sister Angela had mysteriously vanished, Lisa stood in that same basement, staring at a section of wall that didn't match the rest. The concrete here was slightly different in color, the texture just a bit too smooth, as if someone had patched and refinished this particular area. The new homeowners had called her when they noticed the anomaly during their renovation planning, knowing the tragic history of the house. As Lisa ran her fingers along the suspicious wall, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. Her identical twin had disappeared from this very house in 1985, and Lisa was beginning to suspect that Angela had never actually left. The morning of October 15, 2005, had dawned crisp and clear in Cleveland, Ohio, where Lisa Thompson-Martinez lived with her family in a comfortable suburban home. She had built her life around the absence of her twin sister, structuring every decision and every goal around the gaping hole that Angela's disappearance had left in her world. At 43 years old, Lisa was a successful private investigator who specialized in missing persons cases, a career choice that everyone understood was directly connected to her personal tragedy. Her business cards read Thompson Investigations, finding those who can't be found, and her reputation for tenacity and thoroughness had made her one of the most sought-after investigators in the tri-state area. But no case had consumed Lisa like her sister's disappearance. For 20 years, she had followed every lead, pursued every tip, and investigated every theory, no matter how far-fetched. Her home office was filled with filing cabinets containing thousands of pages of documents related to Angela's case: police reports, witness statements, newspaper clippings, private investigator reports, and her own meticulously detailed notes documenting every aspect of her search. The walls were covered with maps marking locations where Angela might have gone, timelines tracking her movements in the days before her disappearance, and photographs showing Angela at various stages of her life. Lisa's husband, David, had learned to live with the ghost of his wife's missing sister. David Martinez was a high school history teacher, a patient and understanding man who had known from their first date that he would always be sharing his wife with the mystery of Angela's fate. They had met at a grief support group in 1995, 10 years after Angela's disappearance, where David was dealing with the loss of his father and Lisa was struggling with the ongoing trauma of not knowing what had happened to her twin. Their courtship had been built on shared understanding of loss and the healing power of love, but David had always known that Lisa would never be completely whole until she found answers about Angela. They had 2 children together: Michael, now 17 and a senior in high school, and Sarah, 15 and a sophomore. Both teenagers had grown up with their Aunt Angela as a constant presence in their household, not as a living person, but as a mystery that shaped their mother's worldview and priorities. The children knew every detail of Angela's story, had studied every photograph and document, and had participated in family discussions about possible leads and theories. They understood that their mother's work as a private investigator was not just a career but a calling driven by her desperate need to find her missing sister. The phone call from Maria Rodriguez had come at 7:30 that morning, just as Lisa was getting ready to drive Sarah to school. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice had been excited but nervous as she explained that her husband Jake, a construction foreman, had discovered something unusual during their basement renovation planning. They had been living in the house on Maple Street for 8 months, fully aware of its tragic history, and had always felt that the property held secrets that had never been uncovered. Mrs. Martinez, Maria had said, using Lisa's married name, "Jake thinks you need to see this. There's a section of basement wall that doesn't match the rest, and our contractor says it looks like someone did repair work at some point. Given what happened to your sister in this house, we thought you should know about it before we start any major renovations." Lisa had felt her heart skip a beat at the news. Over the years, she had returned to 412 Maple Street dozens of times, walking through the house with various owners, searching every room and examining every detail for clues that might have been missed in the original investigation. But she had never noticed anything unusual about the basement wall, perhaps because she had been looking for more obvious signs of disturbance or evidence. The drive from Cleveland to Millbrook, Ohio, took Lisa about an hour and a half through countryside that held 1,000 memories of her childhood with Angela. The twins had been born and raised in this rural community, daughters of Robert and Margaret Thompson, who had owned a small family farm on the outskirts of town. The sisters had been inseparable from birth, sharing not just identical physical features, but an almost supernatural connection that had made them local celebrities throughout their childhood and adolescence. Lisa remembered the countless times she and Angela had driven this same route together, heading home from school events or visits with friends in Cleveland. They had shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams, and an intuitive understanding of each other's thoughts and feelings that often seemed to border on telepathy. Teachers and classmates had marveled at their ability to finish each other's sentences, to know when the other was hurt or upset, even when they were miles apart, and to communicate without words in a way that seemed almost magical. As Lisa drove through the familiar landscape, she found herself thinking about the last conversation she had with Angela on March 15, 1985. Angela had called her at work that morning, sounding tired but not particularly distressed. She had explained that she needed to drive to their parents' house to pick up some winter clothes for her 2-year-old daughter Emma, who was staying with a babysitter while Angela worked her 2 part-time jobs. "I hate to bother Mom and Dad's neighbor for the key," Angela had said during that final phone call, "but Emma really needs her warm clothes for this cold snap we're supposed to get this weekend. I'll just run over there quickly after work and grab what I need from the basement storage." Lisa had offered to meet Angela at the house and help her carry the clothes, but Angela had insisted that it wasn't necessary. "It's just a quick trip," she had said. "I'll be in and out in 20 minutes, but maybe we can get together this weekend? I feel like we haven't had a real conversation in weeks." Those had been the last words Lisa ever heard from her twin sister. Angela had driven to their parents' house that afternoon, using the spare key that was hidden under a fake rock in the garden, but she had never made it home to her apartment or back to pick up Emma from the babysitter. When Angela failed to show up for work the next morning and didn't answer her phone, the babysitter had called Lisa in panic. Lisa had immediately driven to Millbrook and found Angela's car still parked in their parents' driveway, but there was no sign of her sister anywhere. The initial police investigation had been thorough but ultimately fruitless. Detective Raymond Cruz, who was a young patrol officer at the time, had been one of the first responders to the missing person report. He had meticulously documented the scene, noting that Angela's purse was still in her car, her keys were missing, and there were no signs of struggle or forced entry in the house. In the basement, investigators had found a small pile of children's winter clothes neatly folded on a table, as if Angela had been in the middle of gathering Emma's things when something had interrupted her. The mystery had deepened when investigators discovered that Angela had been planning some kind of major life change in the weeks before her disappearance. She had given notice at both of her part-time jobs, telling her supervisors that she was moving to California to live with a distant relative. But when police contacted this relative, they learned that no such arrangement had been made. Angela had never called, never written, and had never made any attempt to establish contact with anyone on the West Coast. The prevailing theory among law enforcement had been that Angela had suffered some kind of mental breakdown, perhaps brought on by the stress of single motherhood and financial difficulties. The police had suggested that she might have deliberately disappeared, perhaps planning to start a new life somewhere under a different identity. But this explanation had never satisfied Lisa or her parents, who knew that Angela would never have voluntarily abandoned her daughter. Emma Thompson, now 22 years old and a recent college graduate, had been raised by Lisa and David after Angela's disappearance. The legal process of gaining custody had been complicated by the fact that Angela was missing rather than legally dead, but eventually the courts had granted Lisa guardianship. Emma had grown up knowing the truth about her mother's disappearance, but she had struggled with feelings of abandonment and confusion that no amount of love from her aunt and uncle could completely heal. As Lisa pulled into the driveway of 412 Maple Street, she was struck by how different the house looked with its new paint job and landscaping. The Rodriguez family had transformed the Victorian structure into a welcoming family home, complete with children's bicycles in the yard, flower boxes under the windows, and a swing set in the backyard. It was hard to reconcile this cheerful domestic scene with the tragedy that had occurred here 20 years earlier. Maria Rodriguez greeted Lisa at the front door with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was a petite woman in her early 30s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. Her husband Jake was a construction foreman who had built their family's financial security through careful planning and skilled craftsmanship. They had 2 young children, Sophia, age 8, and Miguel, age 6, who had heard neighborhood stories about the ghost lady who used to live in their house but didn't fully understand the reality of Angela's disappearance. "Mrs. Martinez, thank you so much for coming on such short notice," Maria said, leading Lisa through the house toward the basement stairs. "Jake discovered this anomaly yesterday when he was doing measurements for our renovation plans. We've been living here for 8 months now, and we've always felt like the house had secrets that we didn't understand. Maybe this is finally our chance to learn what really happened to your sister." The Rodriguez family had known about Angela's disappearance when they purchased the house from the previous owners. The real estate agent had been legally obligated to disclose the fact that a person had gone missing from the property, though the details provided had been sketchy and incomplete. Over the months they had lived there, Maria and Jake had researched the case extensively, reading old newspaper articles online and visiting the local library to review archived coverage of the investigation. "Our kids ask about it sometimes," Maria continued, as they walked through the house. "The neighborhood children have told them stories about the woman who disappeared, and Sophia has had some nightmares about it. We've tried to explain that your sister wasn't a ghost, just a real person who went missing, but you know how children's imaginations work. We're hoping that if we can finally understand what happened here, it might help put everyone's minds at ease." The basement had been partially renovated by previous owners over the years, with modern lighting installed and a concrete floor that looked much newer than the house's 1923 construction date. But the walls were still the original stone and concrete, and it was immediately obvious which section Jake had identified as problematic. A rectangular area about 8 feet wide and 6 feet tall had been patched and refinished with slightly different materials and techniques than the surrounding foundation. Lisa stood before the anomalous section, her heart pounding as childhood memories flooded back. She and Angela had spent countless hours in this basement during their youth, treating it as their private clubhouse and sanctuary. They had set up old furniture in one corner, brought down a battery-powered radio to listen to pop music, and spent hours talking about boys, school, and their dreams for the future. The basement had been their domain, a place where they could speak freely without interference from parents or friends. "This wall," Lisa said softly, running her hand along the suspicious section. "God, I can't believe I never noticed it before." "You're absolutely right. It's completely different from the rest. The texture is wrong. The color is slightly off. Even the way it reflects the light is different. How did I miss this for 20 years?" Jake Rodriguez emerged from behind the old furnace, carrying a tablet computer that displayed the results of a ground-penetrating radar scan he had commissioned the previous day. "Mrs. Martinez, you need to see what we found. There's definitely a void behind this wall, and it's not a natural cavity. Someone deliberately built a chamber back there, then sealed it up and tried to make the repair blend in with the surrounding foundation. The construction work was done carefully, but once you know what to look for, it's obvious that this section doesn't belong." Lisa studied the radar images on Jake's tablet, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. The void appeared to be roughly 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 3 feet deep, large enough to hide a substantial amount of material. Her professional training as a private investigator kicked in as she began to consider the implications of such a discovery. If someone had built a hidden chamber in this basement, they had done so for a specific purpose, and if it had been sealed up around the time of Angela's disappearance, it might contain evidence that could finally solve the 20-year-old mystery. "We need to call the police immediately," Lisa said, pulling out her cell phone. "This could be a crime scene, and we need to document everything properly before we open it up. I know a detective who's been working on Angela's case for years. He'll want to be here when we breach this wall." Detective Raymond Cruz had been expecting a call like this for 2 decades. As a young patrol officer in 1985, he had been one of the first responders when Angela Thompson was reported missing, and the case had haunted him throughout his subsequent career advancement to detective and eventually to his current position as the department's lead cold case investigator. He had reopened Angela's file dozens of times over the years, re-interviewing witnesses, following up on tips, and pursuing every possible lead, but the case had remained frustratingly unsolved. Mrs. Martinez, "I've been waiting for this call for 20 years, Cruz told Lisa when she reached him on his cell phone. "I always suspected that there was more to your sister's disappearance than what we found in the original investigation. If this hidden chamber contains what I think it might, we could finally get the answers we've been looking for. I'll be there in 45 minutes with a full forensic team and all the equipment we'll need to document this properly." While they waited for the police to arrive, Lisa found herself walking through the rest of the house, remembering the life she and Angela had shared within these walls. Every room held memories of their childhood and adolescence. The living room where they had practiced dance routines for school talent shows, the kitchen where they had helped their mother bake cookies for church fundraisers, the staircase where they had sat side by side, whispering secrets and making plans for their adult lives. Angela had been the more outgoing and adventurous of the twins, always ready to try new things and meet new people. She had been the one who convinced Lisa to join the high school drama club, who had talked her into going to their first school dance, and who had encouraged her to apply for college scholarships that she never would have considered on her own. Lisa, by contrast, had been more cautious and analytical, preferring to observe and plan rather than jumping headfirst into new experiences. Despite their different personalities, the twins had been united by an unshakable bond that everyone who knew them recognized as something extraordinary. They had shared clothes and jewelry so freely that even their parents sometimes couldn't remember which item belonged to which daughter. They had developed their own private language of gestures and expressions that allowed them to communicate complex ideas without speaking. And they had demonstrated time and again an almost psychic ability to sense each other's emotions and physical conditions even when they were separated by considerable distances. The tragedy of Angela's disappearance had been magnified by its timing. She had been just 23 years old, a single mother struggling to rebuild her life after a difficult and abusive marriage to Robert Hayes. The marriage had lasted 3 tumultuous years, during which Angela had endured physical violence, emotional manipulation, and financial control that had left her isolated from her family and friends. When she finally found the courage to leave Robert and file for divorce, she had hoped to start fresh and create a stable, happy home for her daughter Emma. But starting over had proven more challenging than Angela had anticipated. She was working 2 part-time jobs, one as a receptionist at the law firm of Morrison & Associates and another as a weekend cashier at Fletcher's grocery store, but still struggling to make ends meet while paying for childcare and trying to save money for her own apartment. Their parents had offered financial help multiple times, but Angela's fierce independence and pride had made her reluctant to accept assistance even when she desperately needed it. Emma, who had just turned 2 at the time of Angela's disappearance, had no memory of her mother beyond what photographs and family stories could provide. Lisa and David had done their best to keep Angela's memory alive for Emma, filling photo albums with pictures of Angela's childhood and sharing stories about her personality, her dreams, and her love for her daughter. But Emma had grown up with a profound sense of loss and abandonment that had shaped her personality and worldview in ways that were both heartbreaking and inspiring. Detective Cruz arrived at the house precisely when he had promised, accompanied by a forensic team from the State Crime Lab and Dr. Patricia Wong, a forensic anthropologist who specialized in cold cases and historical investigations. Dr. Wong was a slight, intense woman in her 40s who had earned a national reputation for her ability to extract meaningful evidence from crime scenes that had been compromised or neglected for years. Mrs. Martinez, Dr. Wong said as her team began setting up their equipment in the basement, "I want you to understand that we might not find what we're hoping for behind this wall. There are many innocent reasons why someone might have built a hidden chamber in their basement: storage for valuable items, protection during severe weather, or simply eccentric home improvement projects. But given the timing and circumstances of your sister's disappearance, we're treating this as a potential crime scene until we know otherwise." The process of documenting and excavating the hidden chamber took several hours, with every step carefully photographed and videotaped to ensure that any evidence discovered would be admissible in court if criminal charges were eventually filed. Wong's team used specialized tools to remove sections of the wall without damaging whatever might be contained within the chamber, while detective crews coordinated with other law enforcement agencies that might need to be involved if the investigation uncovered evidence of serious crimes. As the team worked, Lisa found herself thinking about all the times she had stood in this basement with Angela, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. Angela had always been full of plans and ambitions. She wanted to finish her college degree, maybe become a teacher or a social worker, travel to Europe, and eventually find a man who would love her and Emma unconditionally. Even during the darkest days of her marriage to Robert, Angela had never lost her fundamental optimism about what life could offer if she just had the courage to pursue her dreams. Lisa, on the other hand, had always been more focused on security and stability. She had married David shortly after college and had immediately begun building the kind of safe, predictable life that Angela had sometimes found suffocating. The irony was not lost on Lisa that she had spent the past 20 years living exactly the kind of adventurous, unpredictable life that Angela had always craved, pursuing leads across multiple states and investigating mysteries that often took her into dangerous and uncertain territory. When Dr. Wong's team finally breached the wall and shone their powerful lights into the hidden chamber, what they discovered would change everything. Lisa thought she knew about her sister's disappearance. The chamber had been professionally constructed, with proper ventilation, moisture barriers, and structural support that suggested the builder had extensive construction knowledge and had intended for the space to remain hidden and functional for many years. "This wasn't a hasty job," observed Jake Rodriguez, who had been allowed to remain and observe the excavation because of his construction expertise and his role in discovering the anomaly. "Whoever built this chamber knew exactly what they were doing. They used high-quality materials, proper building techniques, and careful attention to details that would ensure structural integrity and environmental protection. This was built to last and to keep whatever was stored inside safe from moisture, temperature fluctuations, and discovery." The contents of the chamber would prove to be even more shocking than its sophisticated construction. Wong carefully removed items from the hidden space. It became clear that Angela had not been a random victim of opportunistic violence, but rather the target of a carefully planned execution carried out by people with significant power, resources, and motivation to silence her permanently. The first item recovered was a waterproof storage container about the size of a shoebox, sealed with multiple layers of tape and labeled in Angela's distinctive handwriting, "For Lisa. Open only if I never come home." Inside the container was a letter addressed to Lisa, along with a smaller envelope marked "Instructions for Police," and a third envelope labeled "Evidence Inventory and Location Guide." Lisa's hands trembled as she opened the letter addressed to her, while Detective Cruz and Dr. Wong looked on with professional interest and personal concern. The letter was written on several sheets of legal paper in Angela's careful script, dated March 14, 1985, just one day before her disappearance. "My dearest Lisa," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened and I am gone. I pray to God that this day never comes, but I have been living in fear for months now, and I need to make sure that someone I trust knows the truth about what I have discovered and why my life is in danger." The letter went on to describe a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Millbrook's government and law enforcement, involving corruption, murder, and cover-ups that had been operating for years. Angela had stumbled onto this conspiracy almost by accident while working her evening job as a receptionist at Morrison & Associates, the most prestigious law firm in the county. "I was working late on February 8th, filing documents and organizing case files. Angela had written, "When I heard voices coming from Mr. Morrison's private office, the building was supposed to be empty except for me, so I was curious about who might be there. I crept closer to listen, and what I heard made my blood run cold." Angela had overheard a conversation between her boss, attorney James Morrison, and several other men who were discussing the planned murder of Judge Harrison Morrison, James Morrison's uncle, and one of the most respected jurists in the county. The conspirators had been planning to make the judge's death appear natural, using a sophisticated method that would avoid suspicion and allow them to avoid the scrutiny that would come with an obvious murder. They were talking about paying the coroner to falsify the death certificate. Angela's letter continued, about how to make a heart attack look convincing, and about how they would divide up Judge Morrison's assets and political influence after he was dead. I tried to leave without being detected, but I accidentally knocked over a stack of files near the door. They heard the noise and came out to investigate. Although Angela had managed to hide in a supply closet until the men left the building, she had realized that her life was now in serious danger. Judge Harrison Morrison was known throughout the legal community as an incorruptible jurist who had been investigating allegations of corruption in local government and had threatened to expose a network of officials who were taking bribes and manipulating the justice system for personal gain. "I knew I had to go to the police," Angela had written, but then I realized that Police Chief Brennan was one of the men I had heard talking about the murder. I couldn't trust anyone in local law enforcement, and I wasn't sure who else might be involved in the conspiracy. I decided I had to gather evidence on my own before I could safely report what I knew. For the next month, Angela had used her position at the law firm to document the conspiracy, secretly copying files, recording conversations, and photographing meetings between the conspirators. She had discovered that the corruption network included not only Police Chief Daniel Brennan and Attorney James Morrison, but also Mayor Richard Caldwell, City Council President Frank Stevens, and at least 4 other prominent local officials. They killed Judge Morrison on March 2nd. Angela's letter revealed exactly the way they had planned. They made it look like a heart attack. The coroner signed a false death certificate, and the case was closed within hours with no investigation. But I had photographs of them administering the drug that stopped his heart, and I had recordings of them discussing how to divide up his estate and political connections. Angela had realized that exposing the conspiracy would require more than just her testimony, which could easily be discredited or suppressed by the very people she was trying to expose. She had needed to create a secure hiding place for her evidence and a foolproof method of ensuring that the truth would eventually come to light, even if she were killed before she could present her findings to honest authorities. "I've been working with Tony Ritchie to build this hidden chamber," Angela had explained in her letter, referring to a man Lisa remembered as Angela's brief boyfriend in late 1984 and early 1985. "Tony thinks I'm just being paranoid about the divorce proceedings with Robert, and I can't tell him the real reason I need a secure hiding place. He's taught me construction techniques and helped me get the materials I need, but he doesn't know what I'm really planning to store here." The construction of the hidden chamber had taken Angela several weeks, working in small increments during times when she knew the house would be empty. She had carefully removed a section of the basement wall, excavated the space behind it, built a waterproof storage chamber, and then seamlessly repaired the wall to hide any evidence of her work. The project had required considerable skill and planning, qualities that Angela had developed during her marriage to Robert, when she had learned home improvement techniques as a way of maintaining their house on a limited budget. "All of my evidence is stored in this chamber," Angela's letter continued, along with detailed instructions for how to use it to expose the conspiracy and bring the murderers to justice. "Lisa, I know this is a terrible burden to place on you, but you're the only person in the world I trust completely. If something happens to me, please make sure that the truth comes out and that these criminals don't get away with what they've done." As Dr. Wong and her team carefully cataloged the remaining contents of the chamber, the full scope of Angela's investigation became apparent. She had compiled hundreds of pages of documents, dozens of photographs and hours of audio recordings that detailed a corruption network spanning multiple levels of government and law enforcement. The evidence showed financial transactions proving that city contracts had been awarded through bribery, court cases that had been fixed through judicial corruption, and a pattern of intimidation and violence used to silence potential witnesses. But the most damning evidence was a series of surveillance photographs that Angela had taken showing the actual murder of Judge Morrison. Using a telephoto lens and working from a hidden position in the courthouse parking garage, she had captured clear images of Chief Brennan and two other men forcing Judge Morrison to consume a syringe full of some substance, then positioning his body in his car to make his death appear to be the result of a heart attack. "My God," Detective Cruz whispered as he examined the photographs under Dr. Wong's magnifying equipment. "She documented the entire murder sequence. We've got them dead to rights on first-degree murder charges. Even after 20 years, this is the most complete evidence package I've ever seen for a cold case homicide." The investigation that followed Angela's evidence discovery would consume the next 3 years of Detective Cruz's career and would ultimately result in one of the largest corruption scandals in Ohio state history. Although several of the original conspirators had died in the intervening years, including Police Chief Brennan, who had suffered a fatal stroke in 1997, and Mayor Caldwell, who had died in a car accident in 2001, enough living participants remained to make prosecution feasible. Attorney James Morrison, now 71 years old and still practicing law in Millbrook, was arrested within hours of the evidence being authenticated by the state crime lab. The case against him was so overwhelming that he confessed to his role in the conspiracy within days of his arrest, hoping to negotiate a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation in prosecuting the remaining members of the network. "Your sister was incredibly brave," Detective Cruz told Lisa as they sat in the police station conference room, surrounded by boxes of evidence that Angela had compiled 20 years earlier. She knew that investigating these people would almost certainly cost her life, but she did it anyway because she believed that justice was more important than her personal safety. The sophistication and thoroughness of her evidence-gathering operation is absolutely remarkable for someone with no formal training in criminal investigation. But understanding the full scope of Angela's courage only made the tragedy of her death more devastating for Lisa and her family. Angela had spent the final months of her life living in constant terror, gathering evidence while knowing that discovery would mean certain death. She had built the hidden chamber and prepared her final letter while desperately hoping that she would never need to use either one. The forensic examination of Angela's remains, which were eventually discovered in a remote wooded area 15 miles outside Millbrook, revealed that she had died from severe blunt force trauma to the head and chest. The medical examiner estimated that she had survived for several hours after the initial attack, long enough to have returned to the basement chamber and sealed her evidence before succumbing to her injuries. "She came back here after they beat her, Dr. Wong explained to Lisa during the formal briefing on the forensic findings. She was bleeding internally and probably had multiple broken ribs, but she managed to drive back to this house and secure her evidence before she died. That level of determination and courage is almost incomprehensible." The personal items found with Angela's remains told the story of her final hours in heartbreaking detail. Her watch had stopped at 11:47 p.m. on March 15, 1985, indicating the approximate time of her death. Her car keys were found clutched in her hand, suggesting that she had been trying to drive herself to safety when she finally collapsed. And wrapped carefully in a plastic bag in her jacket pocket was a final message written on a scrap of paper in what appeared to be her own blood. "Evidence in basement chamber. Tell Emma I love her. Make them pay." Emma Thompson Hayes, who had grown up wondering why her mother had abandoned her, was devastated to learn the truth about Angela's death, but also profoundly proud to discover that her mother had died fighting for justice. As an adult, Emma had become a prosecutor specializing in public corruption cases, drawn to the field by what she had always assumed was a general desire to fight injustice, but which she now understood was her unconscious attempt to continue her mother's work. "I always felt like I was meant to prosecute corrupt officials," Emma told the media during a press conference following James Morrison's conviction. Now I understand why. My mother's spirit was guiding me toward the work she never got to finish. She gave her life to expose these criminals, and I'm going to make sure that her sacrifice wasn't meaningless." The trials that resulted from Angela's evidence were front-page news for months, as the full scope of the corruption network was revealed to the public. The conspiracy had operated for over a decade, influencing hundreds of court cases, city contracts, and political decisions. Bribes had been paid, witnesses had been intimidated, and evidence had been suppressed to protect the network's members and associates from prosecution. City Council President Frank Stevens, now in his 70s and suffering from early-stage dementia, was deemed incompetent to stand trial, but was stripped of his pension and benefits. County Commissioner William Burke, who had been in his early 30s during the conspiracy, received a 25-year federal prison sentence for his role in the judge's murder and subsequent cover-up. 3 other former officials received sentences ranging from 10 to 15 years for their participation in the corruption scheme. But perhaps the most significant impact of Angela's evidence was the comprehensive reform of Millbrook's government and law enforcement agencies. The corruption scandal led to the resignation or firing of dozens of officials, the implementation of new oversight procedures, and the establishment of independent review boards to monitor government activities and investigate allegations of misconduct. Lisa found herself at the center of a media storm as Angela's story captured national attention. The tale of the twin sisters, one who had died fighting corruption and another who had never stopped searching for the truth, resonated with people across the country who were struggling with their own experiences of government misconduct and institutional failure. "Angela's courage changed our entire community," Lisa said during a speech at the foundation that was established in her sister's memory. But her story also has the power to inspire people in other communities who are facing similar challenges. Corruption thrives in darkness and silence, but when brave people like Angela step forward to expose the truth, that light can illuminate injustices that have been hidden for decades. The house on 412 Maple Street became a pilgrimage site for people interested in the case and in the broader issues of government accountability and whistleblower protection. The Rodriguez family, understanding the historical significance of their home, worked with the city to install a memorial plaque in the basement, marking the location where Angela's evidence had been discovered. "We feel honored to be living in a house with such an important history," Maria Rodriguez told a reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. "Angela Thompson gave her life to protect our community from corruption, and we want to make sure that her story is preserved and shared with future generations. Our children are growing up understanding that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have the courage to stand up for what's right." The psychological impact of finally learning the truth about Angela's fate was profound for Lisa and her family. For 20 years, Lisa had carried guilt about not being there when Angela needed her most, about not sensing her twins' distress through their supposed psychic connection. Learning that Angela had been deliberately targeted by professional criminals who had carefully planned her murder helped Lisa understand that there was nothing she could have done to prevent the tragedy. "The connection we shared as twins was real," Lisa explained to Dr. Rachel Kim, the psychologist who helped her process the complex emotions that arose from Angela's case. "But it wasn't the kind of supernatural warning system that I thought it should have been. Angela was communicating with me all along, but through the evidence she left behind and through the persistent feeling I had that something was wrong with that basement wall. She knew I would never stop searching, and she prepared her evidence specifically for me to find." David Martinez, Lisa's husband, had supported her obsessive search for Angela throughout their marriage, even when it strained their relationship and affected their children's lives. When the truth finally emerged, he felt a complex mixture of relief and vindication. Relief that the mystery was finally solved, and vindication that his wife's instincts about her sister had been correct all along. Lisa always knew that Angela wouldn't have just disappeared, David told a documentary filmmaker who was creating a film about the case. She never stopped believing that her sister had been the victim of foul play, even when law enforcement officials suggested that she should accept Angela's disappearance as a voluntary act. That instinct, that refusal to give up hope, that's what eventually led to justice being served. Michael and Sarah Martinez, Lisa and David's children, had grown up with their missing aunt as a constant presence in their household. They had heard countless stories about Angela, had studied every photograph and document related to her case, and had watched their mother pursue lead after lead in her desperate search for answers. When the truth was finally revealed, both teenagers felt a profound mix of emotions: grief for the aunt they would never meet, pride in their mother's persistence, and amazement at Angela's extraordinary courage. "Our mom always told us that family members never give up on each other," 17-year-old Michael said during a school presentation about the case. "She taught us that love can transcend death and that the truth will always find a way to come out, no matter how long it takes." Aunt Angela's story proves that one person's courage can change the world, even if they don't live to see the results. The financial impact of the corruption scandal was enormous, with the city facing millions of dollars in lawsuits from victims of the rigged justice system. Hundreds of court cases had to be reviewed and potentially overturned, property had to be returned to rightful owners, and compensation had to be paid to individuals who had been wrongly convicted or had suffered other injustices because of the corruption network. Insurance companies initially balked at covering the claims, arguing that the deliberate criminal acts of city officials fell outside the scope of standard municipal coverage. Eventually, the state government had to step in with emergency funding to help Millbrook deal with the financial crisis and begin the process of rebuilding its compromised institutions. The reforms that followed the scandal were comprehensive and far-reaching, touching every aspect of local government and law enforcement. New oversight procedures were implemented to monitor official activities. Independent review boards were established to investigate allegations of misconduct, and transparency requirements were strengthened to make it much more difficult for similar corruption to take root in the future. Emma Thompson Hayes played a crucial role in the prosecution of her mother's killers, working closely with federal prosecutors to ensure that every aspect of the conspiracy was thoroughly investigated and properly presented to juries. Her legal expertise and intimate knowledge of her mother's evidence helped prosecutors build the strongest possible cases against the defendants. Working on these prosecutions has been both the most difficult and the most rewarding experience of my legal career, Emma said during the sentencing hearing for the last defendant to be convicted. "My mother died to bring these criminals to justice, and I'm honored to have been able to finish what she started. But the real victory isn't in the prison sentences we've obtained, it's in the reforms that will prevent other families from going through what we've experienced." The personal cost of the long investigation and trial process was significant for all of the family members involved. Lisa found herself dealing with post-traumatic stress as she processed not only the knowledge of Angela's death, but also the understanding of how much her sister had suffered in her final months. The threatening phone calls, the constant fear for her safety and Emma's welfare, the knowledge that powerful people wanted her dead. All of this Angela had endured in isolation, trying to protect her family while gathering evidence to expose the conspiracy. Lisa began working with Dr. Kim, a therapist who specialized in trauma and complicated grief, learning to cope with the complex emotions that arose from finally knowing the truth about Angela's fate. The relief of having answers was mixed with anger at the injustice Angela had suffered, grief for all the years they had lost, and profound admiration for the incredible courage her sister had demonstrated. "I always knew Angela was brave," Lisa told Dr. Kim during one of their therapy sessions, "but I never realized just how extraordinary she was. She was fighting a war against corruption and evil, and she was doing it completely by herself. The strength that must have taken, the determination to keep going even when she knew it would probably cost her life. It's almost superhuman." The therapeutic process also helped Lisa understand that her 20-year search for Angela had been a form of continued connection between the twins, even across the barrier of death. Angela's spirit had indeed been guiding Lisa toward the truth, though not in the supernatural way that Lisa had sometimes imagined. Instead, Angela's careful preparation and evidence preservation had created a trail that only someone with Lisa's determination and investigative skills could have followed to its ultimate conclusion. Detective Cruz, who had worked on missing persons cases for his entire career, used Angela's case as a teaching example for other investigators and for families dealing with similar tragedies. Angela Thompson created one of the most sophisticated evidence preservation systems I've ever encountered, he said during a presentation to the International Association of Chiefs of Police. She knew she was going to die, but she made sure her evidence would survive and eventually bring her killers to justice. That kind of foresight and courage is extraordinary, and it should inspire all of us to never give up on seemingly hopeless cases. The case also highlighted the critical importance of listening to family members who insist that their loved ones would never have voluntarily disappeared. Lisa's unwavering belief that Angela had been the victim of foul play had been dismissed by many people over the years, including some law enforcement officials who felt that she was unable to accept the reality of her sister's choices. Family members know things that investigators don't always recognize, Cruz explained during a training session for new detectives. They understand their loved ones' personalities, habits, fears, and dreams in ways that outsiders can't fully appreciate. When a family member tells us that their loved one would never have just walked away from their life, we need to listen to that insight and investigate accordingly. Lisa Thompson never stopped believing in her sister, and that belief eventually led to one of the most important cold case breakthroughs in our department's history. The media attention surrounding Angela's case led to renewed interest in other unsolved disappearances and potential cases of government corruption throughout Ohio and neighboring states. Several other jurisdictions launched their own investigations into suspicious missing person cases using Angela's evidence-gathering techniques as a model for what victims might have done to document threats against their lives. The Angela Thompson Foundation, established by Lisa and Emma with support from the legal settlement they received from the city of Millbrook, became a national resource for families dealing with missing persons cases and suspected government corruption. The foundation provided financial assistance for private investigators, legal support for families navigating complex bureaucracies, and advocacy for policy changes that would better protect witnesses and whistleblowers. My sister's courage didn't just solve her own case, Lisa said during the foundation's inaugural fundraising dinner. Her methodology and determination have inspired other families to keep searching for their missing loved ones, and her evidence has led to reforms that will protect future whistleblowers. Angela's legacy is still growing, 20 years after her death. The psychological research conducted on Lisa and Emma's experiences became part of a larger academic study on the long-term effects of unresolved trauma and the healing power of truth and justice. Researchers found that the knowledge of what had really happened to Angela, while painful, ultimately provided a foundation for genuine healing that had been impossible while the mystery remained unsolved. Not knowing is often worse than knowing, even when the truth is terrible, explained Dr. Kim, who published several academic papers based on her work with the Thompson family. Lisa and Emma were able to begin real healing only after they understood what had happened to Angela and why. The uncertainty and self-blame that had characterized their experience for 20 years was replaced by a clear understanding of Angela's courage and sacrifice. The long-term impact of Angela's evidence extended far beyond the criminal prosecutions and government reforms that directly resulted from her investigation. Her story inspired other potential whistleblowers to come forward with evidence of corruption and abuse, knowing that their courage could make a lasting difference even if they faced personal danger as a result. Several major corruption scandals in other states were broken open by witnesses who specifically cited Angela's example as their inspiration for speaking out against powerful interests. The Thompson Foundation tracked these cases and provided support for the witnesses and their families, creating a network of mutual assistance that strengthened the impact of individual acts of courage. Angela proved that one person can make a difference, said Margaret Collins, a municipal employee in Pennsylvania who exposed a bribery scheme in her city's contracting process. When I saw what she had accomplished by documenting corruption instead of just complaining about it, I knew I had to follow her example. She showed us all that the truth is more powerful than any conspiracy as long as someone is brave enough to preserve it and share it. The house on 412 Maple Street eventually became a National Historic Landmark, recognized for its significance in exposing government corruption and inspiring the reforms that strengthened democratic institutions throughout the region. The Rodriguez family continued to live there, feeling honored to be the stewards of such an important piece of American history. "We get visitors from all over the country now," Maria Rodriguez explained during a television interview on the 5th anniversary of Angela's evidence discovery. "People come here to see where she worked, to document the conspiracy, and to understand how one person's courage can change an entire community. Our children are growing up with a deep appreciation for civic responsibility and the importance of standing up for what's right." The basement chamber where Angela's evidence had been hidden was preserved exactly as it had been discovered, serving as a powerful reminder of one woman's determination to ensure that the truth would eventually prevail over corruption and violence. Educational programs brought school groups through the house to learn about the importance of integrity in government and the role that ordinary citizens can play in protecting democratic institutions. Lisa continued to work as a private investigator, but she increasingly specialized in cases involving potential government corruption and institutional abuse. Her experience with Angela's case had taught her to look for evidence in unexpected places and to never underestimate the determination of victims to document their experiences and preserve evidence for future discovery. "Angela taught me that victims often know more and do more than we realize," Lisa would tell other investigators during training sessions. "They might not be able to go to the police or the media immediately, but they might find ways to document what's happening to them and preserve that evidence for later use. We need to think creatively about where evidence might be hidden and how victims might have tried to communicate across time with future investigators." The connection between the twins, which had seemed broken by Angela's death, had actually been strengthened by the discovery of her evidence and the understanding of her sacrifice. Lisa came to understand that her persistent feeling that something was wrong with the basement wall had been a form of communication from Angela, a way for her sister to guide her toward the truth that would finally bring justice and closure. "We were always connected," Lisa explained during a speech at Emma's law school graduation. "Death didn't break that connection, it just changed how we communicated with each other. Angela left me the greatest gift imaginable: the truth about what happened to her and the evidence needed to bring her killers to justice. Our bond as twins was real, and it was strong enough to transcend death itself." Detective Cruz retired shortly after the final prosecutions were completed, but he continued to lecture at law enforcement conferences about the importance of cold case investigation and the need to listen carefully to victims' families. Angela Thompson's case proved that no investigation is ever truly finished as long as there are people who care about the victim and refuse to give up, he would tell his audiences. Evidence can survive for decades, waiting for the right investigator with the right skills and the right determination to find it and act on it. The corruption network that Angela had exposed proved to have tentacles reaching into neighboring counties and even into state government agencies. Her evidence led to investigations in 6 other jurisdictions and resulted in the prosecution of more than 70 individuals on charges ranging from bribery and extortion to murder and racketeering. The organized crime connections that Angela had documented helped federal authorities understand how regional criminal enterprises operated and how they infiltrated legitimate institutions to protect their activities and expand their influence. Her work contributed to a broader understanding of corruption patterns that influenced law enforcement strategies throughout the Midwest. Emma Thompson Hayes eventually became a federal prosecutor specializing in public corruption cases, directly following in her mother's footsteps by dedicating her career to fighting the same kinds of criminals who had killed Angela. Her first-hand experience with the devastating effects of government corruption made her a passionate and effective advocate for victims and a formidable opponent for defendants who thought their power and connections would protect them from prosecution. "My mother never got to see justice served in her own case," Emma said during her swearing-in ceremony as a federal prosecutor. "But she made sure that justice would eventually be possible, not just for her, but for all the other victims of this corruption network. Every case I prosecute, every corrupt official I help convict, is a continuation of the work she started. Her courage lives on in every victory we achieve against those who abuse their power." The story of the twin sisters became the subject of multiple books, documentaries, television programs, and academic studies. Criminologists studied Angela's evidence-gathering methods and her chamber construction techniques. Psychologists examined the twins' connection and Lisa's 20-year search process. Political scientists analyzed the corruption network and the governmental reforms that followed its exposure. Angela's case became a touchstone for discussions about whistleblower protection, victim advocacy, and the importance of persistence in seeking justice. Law schools used her story to teach students about the ethical obligations of attorneys and the potential consequences of legal corruption. Criminal justice programs analyzed her investigation methods and evidence preservation techniques. Lisa often returned to the basement of 412 Maple Street, not to grieve but to remember, and to draw inspiration from her sister's extraordinary courage. The wall that had once hidden terrible secrets now bore a bronze memorial plaque reading, "In memory of Angela Thompson, who gave her life for justice and truth." But for Lisa, the most important memorial was the knowledge that Angela's sacrifice had not been meaningless, that her evidence had brought down a criminal network, reformed corrupt institutions, and inspired others to stand up for justice regardless of the personal cost. The connection between the twins, which had been tested by 20 years of separation and mystery, had ultimately been strengthened by the discovery of Angela's evidence and the full revelation of her heroism. Lisa understood that her sister had been communicating with her throughout the decades of searching, through the persistent intuition that led her back to the basement wall, through the determination that kept her investigating when others had given up hope, and through the love that had motivated both sisters to never stop fighting for truth and justice. In the end, the basement of 412 Maple Street had been transformed from a place of childhood play and later adult mystery into a shrine to courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of family love. Angela Thompson had created more than just a hiding place for evidence. She had created a time capsule that would eventually speak for victims who could no longer speak for themselves, challenge corruption that had operated with impunity for years, and inspire future generations to stand up for what is right, regardless of the personal consequences. The mystery of Angela's disappearance was finally solved, but the legacy of her courage would endure for generations. Her story became a powerful reminder that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they are driven by love, justice, and an unwavering commitment to truth. The twin sisters who had shared everything in life had shared one final, transcendent gift: the gift of justice, the power of truth, and the knowledge that some bonds truly are unbreakable, even by death itself.